Our scripture reading this morning comes from Matthew 13. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat, sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. As he sowed, some seeds fell on the path. The birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil. They sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among them, among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of the wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word, understands it, who indeed bears fruit, and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The word of the Lord. May we be blessed.
Sometimes I just don't get it. In today's world, we need to guard against carelessness. The story that Jesus told, God is just plain careless.
Why do you say that?
Well, it appears that God doesn't value God's own love. God throws it anywhere, and not particularly caring where it lands, on or on whom it lands.
That's just the point. God offers God's love freely to all, knowing that some will choose to receive it and others will not. But God continues to try.
But isn't that irresponsible? I mean, there are lots of people who just don't believe in God or choose not to believe. There are lots of people who claim to have faith, but when tough times come, they doubt everything, especially God. And what about those who are easily swayed by false prophets? You know what I mean, those who think that God is obsolete and they have the latest handle on things. See what I mean? God's got to be a lot more careful.
This is never a one-shot deal. God will continue to lavish God's love on all creation. And you are right, some of it will die out, some of it will fade, some will be corrupted, and some will take good root. That's what it is all about. God is willing to take a chance. God's love is inexhaustible, and it is always there for us. Within this love, we will find healing, peace, courage, strength, patience, so many good things. Don't worry, God will always be with us.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies. I think I've told you before, I moved to Lubbock, Texas, back in 1977. I had just gotten married, and someone had come to our church to tell us about Lubbock Christian College. And he told me that I could become a young preacher if I went to Lubbock Christian College, and they have a preaching program, and I wanted to be a preacher boy. I was 20 years old. Don't want to fudge about my age. I'd been married for all of 2 months, and I was really into winning souls for Jesus. My church would go door knocking and invite people to know Jesus, and we had these flip charts that we could show them, or we had a slide projector where we could show them, the steps to salvation. And while we usually had a door shut on our face, every now and then somebody would let you in. But at 20 years old, I was really on fire for Jesus. So I was going to go to the preacher school, Lubbock Christian College, so that I could learn the best methods of saving souls. I had arranged before I got there that there was a Christian man who owned storage units, and my first wife and I were going to run those units while I was in college, and she would stay home and just rent them out to people and clean them out. And I remember talking to him on the phone. I was in California, he was in Texas, so we had never met. But he said to me, before I hire you, I've heard that Californians are into mixed marriages. And this was in the 1970s. I told him I was concerned about mixed marriage as well. After all, I was Irish and my first wife was English. So I was a little concerned about that. But that's, of course, not what he meant by a mixed marriage. I said, I promise you, I have no affinity for England. I don't know if he got it or not, but I got the job. And he paid me in advance for the month $200 and got a place to live. And I was on my way to becoming a preacher. And then one day I got a call from him. Actually, he stopped by the office and he said, I don't like the job that you and your spouse are doing, so you're fired. I've already paid you for the month. You'll need to be out by tomorrow. And I'm not sure what the problem was, but it wasn't working out. I had to go to a friend of mine, the only friend I had in all of Lubbock, Texas, and ask him, I said, I need $50 to get home. It's not going to work out for me here. I remember, though, the first night I arrived in Lubbock, Texas, and it was late at night. We didn't have a place to stay that night. We needed a hotel. And an officer saw us sitting by the side of the road trying to read a map, in the old-fashioned days when you had maps. And he said, young man, what are you doing here? And I said, well, we're looking for a place to stay for the night. We just got here from California. I said, I came to Lubbock because I want to be a preacher. And he said, well, preacher boy, you don't want to go over there. And he was talking about the other side of the tracks. He said, you want to stay over here where our people are. And I said to him, understand, I'm from California. We don't talk that way. And I said, well, what do you mean exactly? What are our people? He said, well, the coloreds live over there, and the whites live over here. And you know me. I said to him, well, what about the Irish? Where do they stay? He looked dumbfounded, and he walked away. So that $50 got us home. Even was enough money back then, not only to drive from Lubbock to San Diego, but spend a night in a seedy hotel in Arizona. Maybe it was Lubbock or Tucson, I don't remember. But my tail was tucked between my legs as I got home because I knew there would be people disappointed in me, and I was disappointed as well. Because I thought God had called me to be a preacher. And so I think, in my eyes, I'd failed. And I never gave it a thought of becoming a preacher again until 16 years later. I'd given up on the idea, and I'm sure that others had given up on me as well. So I ask you, I had this conversation with a person this week. How do you know when to give up on somebody? When does it hit you that you should give up on somebody else? Some people are lost causes, right? From the very get-go. I've had teachers who predict which children will go from elementary school to the prison system. Sad. Some people some would argue, just really have no potential. And it would be wasteful to invest in their future, right? Some would say we should only invest our time and talent in projects and in people that have a great chance of success, right? Why would we waste good seed on bad soil? About 10 years ago, I was helping a man. He was a drug addict. He lived in a seedy hotel, really seedy. And this was in Hartford, Connecticut. His mother was a member of my church, and she asked me to call on him to see if I could help in any way, because I'd worked with addicts before and had some success in working with addicts. He was addicted to opioids, but then oftentimes people who are addicted to the opioid pills become so expensive, and so they switch to heroin, which is much cheaper, still have the same effect. His name was Todd. And one of the reasons Todd was living in a hotel is because he had a dog. And most places that would rent to someone who's on, services of some sort don't rent to people with dogs. So he just found it easier to stay in a seedy hotel. They didn't care if he had a dog, just as long as rent was paid. Todd and I would get together. Sometimes we'd go to Starbucks. He loved Starbucks. And then sometimes we go to Chipotle's, because I love Chipotle's. And I would talk to him about his plans. That living in a seedy hotel was not a plan. And oftentimes I would visit him in the hospital. He had serious health issues, back issues, which is how he got addicted to opioids, because of so many surgeries that he had had. And I asked him, I could get you into public housing. And he said, well, I won't go because they won't let me have my dog. Every now and then, we talk about other things. But mostly we talked about, what are you going to do? How can I help you? A friend of mine, still a good friend, his name is Mark, longtime police officer in the town where my friend was staying in the hotel. And I told Mark I'm visiting Todd on a frequent basis. And I told him what hotel Todd stayed in. He said, Michael, you're really wasting your time. I know who he is. We get called out there on a frequent basis. He frequently had overdoses, and so the paramedics and the police would both show up. He said, don't waste your time. I continued to see Todd anyway. He ended up dying of an overdose, probably after I'd been visiting him for about a year, and I performed his funeral. And lots of addicts and friends of his came to the funeral and told me how appreciative they were that I tried working with him, with Todd, and tried to save him. They stood up at the funeral, I'll never forget, telling their stories of how they had worked through a program, most of them 12-step programs, and how grateful that they were. And they encouraged others who were there, because they knew Todd's friends still used drugs, and they stood up to testify that there was a way out. At the same time, Lori and I were working with a young heroin addict who had started with opioids when she was in the military, 5 years in the Navy. And I saw her one day in a hospital. And while I was there on the last day that she was in the hospital, the social worker had come in and told her, you have to leave. You have to go back to where you were, to the seedy hotel where she worked as a prostitute and had a pimp. She didn't have any choice. She said, but I want to go into treatment. The social worker said, well, when you checked in here 2 weeks ago, you didn't want to go into treatment. I remember asking you. Well, ask anybody that's high on heroin if they want to go into treatment, and they're going to tell you no. I had a cell phone. I had Lori at school, and I said, Lori, I've got someone here I think we could help, who I think is worth investing our time in. She has a 1-year-old child. I don't even think, she may not have even been 1 year old at the time. And a child had been taken away from her by social services, thank God. The child had been taken away from her. But she wanted to get her life back together. After all, she'd been in the Navy for 5 years. She wanted to get her life back together, and she wanted to be able to get her baby back. And she had another child, also older child, about 7 or 8 years old, who didn't live with her but lived with her ex-husband. And so Lori and I brought her into our home. It took weeks to get her into treatment. The Navy didn't want to have anything to do with her because she had received a less than honorable discharge, even though she had served faithfully in the Navy for 5 years. So we worked and we worked and we worked. We got her into treatment. She got out of treatment. We helped her get a job. We gave her a car. Finally, she was able to get into housing, and we found her housing in our church, got her all the furniture she would need for her house. And within 6 months, she was able to get her beautiful child back. Last I heard, 10 years ago, well, it's been less than 10 years, but she's been clean and sober for 10 years. Last I heard, she's still clean and sober and raising that beautiful child. In this morning's reading, we'll presume the story is a parable about God casting seeds everywhere. Seeds God cast everywhere, on good soil and bad soil, on all types of people, every variety of soil, regardless of the quality of the soil, God casted the seeds. And why is that? Is it because we humans oftentimes want to judge where we throw the seeds and say, well, they don't deserve any seeds over there. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. It's not going to happen for them. It's just bad soil. What can you do about it? Is it possible that Jesus is telling us in this story that we are not to judge the soil that the seed goes on? Just cast it and let God do the work on the soil? Could be. I'm sure living in the desert, you've seen things grow where things are not supposed to grow, right? I mean, I see it all the time. We go out on hikes and I see rocks and I see trees growing out of the rocks and I see cactus growing out of the rocks. What's not supposed to grow there? How does that happen? Probably because some bird has carried a seed somewhere or the wind has blown it and it takes root. Are we to decide who is a lost cause? Maybe Jesus is saying is that maybe the soil is not receptive today to growing the seed. I know a lot of people like that. They're just not ready for it. You know them as well. They're your relatives. They're my relatives, right? They're not bad people. They're just people who have plates that are already too full. And spirituality, religion, faith, whatever you want to call it, Jesus, God, it's just not a priority for them. And so on Sunday mornings, their buddies call and say, hey, would you like, not on a day like today, I hope, would you like to go out for a round of golf? And of course they go. I mean, it's their day off. Why wouldn't you go golfing with your buddies on a Sunday morning? Or maybe they just sleep in. I have friends that read the New York Times faithfully every morning, drinking their cup of coffee until baseball comes on TV. Another family, you may have seen them before, they join the church, they become involved, they become active, and everybody in the church becomes excited about them joining. But just as fast, They seem to quit coming, and they go back to whatever their previous routine had been. And why is that? Why do they do that? Why does the seed not seem to want to take root in them? I love what Fred Craddock said about this. And at first, I've read it a dozen times. You might find it offensive, but if you know Fred Craddock, you know it's not meant to be offensive. Fred says that a shallow person is one who has two things on their mind. One is pleasure, one is displeasure. And they want to give 100% of their lives to pleasure and spend everything possible to avoid displeasure. Now, that seems sort of logical, right? But stay with me. They do what they want to do to avoid what they do not want to do. And Fred says that is shallow. He says it's as shallow as the person who is contemplating suicide but hesitates to do so until she has lost 15 pounds because she wants to look good in the casket. That's shallow. Some people, they just have their priorities, and the Spirit of God is really, it's down on the list. It's not off the list. It's just down on the list. Not quite off the list, but it's not up with the important stuff. They say, well, right now, my career is really taking off. And there will come a time when I will get back to church, but right now, I just got to focus on my career. And so they may make cameo appearances in church, Christmas and Easter, wedding or a funeral maybe. They get busy. And then finally, their kids move out of the house and they say, well, I have more time, but let me just try to accomplish a few more things. And then retirement comes. Traveling comes with retirement. Volunteer work comes with retirement. And they become busy. And so those cameo appearances, they're still there. And they're still waiting. And then finally, there's the seed that falls on the good soil. It takes root and it grows and it survives, whether it's cold or hot, whether it's rain or in drought. They are nourished by God. Truly humble and loving servants, giving of their time and their talent and their treasure. And they expect nothing in return, not even recognition. We don't know which seed will grow or on what soil. We don't know whether it's going to be plucked up or wither and die. It's not for us to know. All we are asked to do, scatter the seed. Church, scatter the seed wherever and let God do the rest. We just don't know. People can change. And if you don't believe people can change, then you don't believe in the story of Christ and his redemption and how he changes people and how the Holy Spirit works in people's lives. People do change. God could work with their soil over time. Just cast the seed and let God worry about the rest. So I say, with great conviction, do not give up on anybody, whatever you do. And certainly never give up on yourself. They may not turn it around today and get it right, But the seed is going to eventually be covered by sand, by the soil, and eventually it may take root. And someday, even though that seed has remained dormant for many seasons, and we know that happens in the desert all the time. Some seeds only bloom every 7 years in the desert. Somewhere down the road, there might be this tremendous harvest where at once it looked hopeless. And I've learned over the years that God has not called me to win souls to Jesus or to save another person. God takes care of that. Just sow the seeds wherever, on all sides of the road, on both sides of the track. Don't let anybody tell you to stay on your side of the track with our people, whoever those are, even the Irish. Just take those little bitty seeds of love, just scatter them, and then just go about scattering them. And then someday, I promise you will witness a great harvest. This morning we're going to be singing a couple of songs from our new Chalice Praise hymnals. We bought a bunch of them a year ago, and they finally arrived a few months ago.